The new Razing of Westerlands Arcane Journal has dropped, and I had maybe mistakenly thought that we were going to be getting a new Arcane, Army of Infamy for Chaos. Instead, we've just got loads of rules that you can put into your Chaos soup, and I think they look pretty interesting. So we're going to talk about those today. Going to be looking at the magic items another time, because these are not magic items for Chaos. These are magic items for everyone. We'll get to that later. The first thing, just to very quickly cover, is that the new profiles we're going to go through for the Marauders and Marauder horsemen are straight just replacements of the old versions. So I was expecting that there'd be some sort of transition period where you could use 25 mil bases or 30 mil bases. However, it has gone to fully 30 mil bases now for all Marauder models, which is interesting because obviously they released the models less than 2 years ago now, so they probably could have just boxed them up with the new bigger square bases at the when they intended to change the base sizes. But who can say when that decision was actually made? I know there's a lot of lead time on these sorts of things, but maybe it was done post-release, and they did say the scope of the project has changed, so maybe these are things that were sculpted post that point. Anyway, just wanted to point out this does come with, obviously, there was an article yesterday about how this is going to, what sort of stuff you might expect to see. And the profiles will be included in the next FAQ and errata update, scheduled for the end of January, and will include a number of balance updates for factions new and old, yada yada. So just some great news here that obviously we'll maybe discuss another time. But this is, just to point out, it is a complete replacement of the, previous ones. I'm just not sure how people are going to work with that in terms of when they're going to swap over. I assume tournament organizers are going to swap over as soon as the Arcane Journal is officially on shelves. That's normally when, people are able to use new rules at events. That's typically it. But I wonder if it's going to be a case of maybe TOs hold off until January when people can use the new, use the new rules, or maybe people will have some sort of wriggle room at their events. It just changes how they're used pretty significantly, I think. And also there's a rebasing aspect to it, going from 25 to 30 mils. Obviously, you can just use base extenders or movement trays that you can put things into. You can get movement trays that are specifically for like 25 mil to extend to 30 mil, yada yada. So maybe that's the way that people go. But, Marauder horsemen can skirmish, Marauders can skirmish. And honestly, for both of them, that's probably how I'm typically going to play them. Although maybe that changes with the new sets of rules we've got here. We've got some interesting stuff. So, yeah, an interesting set of changes that I think maybe could have been handled a little bit better. But I also don't know the timescale of when they decided to make this change or when they got the models. So if you've got the models already, you'll probably be looking at either rebasing or looking at some base extenders for your Marauder hordes. So we've already talked about the base size changing for Marauders, and the stat line is the same. Okay, cool. But then let's compare what they've got, because they're staying the same points cost, but they've ended up with a lot of new upgrades, either baked in or available to them. And then alternatively, there are some things that they've lost and some playstyles that have been lost from the way that you could use them previously. So I've got the PDF here for the Ravening Hordes as well. So if we just look at the stat line, exactly the same. Threes across the board being humans with a weapon skill 4, leadership 6 points, yada yada. Come as a unit of 5. Obviously base size has changed. 5+, and they come with hand weapons here, but in the new set of rules that will be rolled out across the board for everyone, they come with a light armor base for the cost as well, and that's quite nice. A 6-up save is not too impressive, but having it baked in and also being able to take shields for just a point model, getting into that 4-up save with your hand weapon shield parry save in combat is nice. Also, just having a little bit more durability against stuff like, ranged output is nice to have as well, which stacks with some other rules that we'll get to later on in the video. So what do we got? You can have shields for a pointer model, same as it is before. You can't buy light armor, and that's just because you've got it built in already. And great weapons and flails, exactly the same here. 2 points per model, 1 point per model. So if you're looking for some sort of melee blender Marauder brick, I'm not sure how super useful that would be. I could see flails, maybe if you're going flails and shields, that takes you to 8 points a model, and that's the same as you were paying for just light armor and shields before. So maybe quite an easy change to make there if you're looking to put some Marauders in your list. But I really like them just hand weapon, light armor, shields, 7 points per model before we start looking at any of the other buffs out them. We'll get to the rest here in a second. We'll talk about the Chaos Cults more as a general point in a second. Keep your command, and now you can take 25 points worth of magic items on Marauder Headsman. And this is not 0 to 1 per 1,000 points, as we're going to get to in a second. This is just all Marauders can have magic items up to 25 points. That means you can have magic resist to Marauder Headsman, or units of Marauders. If you wanted to do what we see a lot of the time is because the Warpfire Dragon has got inbuilt magic resist too. And then you might take, a couple of dragons that have got, the brazen collar, so they've got magic resist, they've got the ward save, they've got the regen that you've bought them. You've got these 3 big beaters that all have magic resist, and then your core, if you wanted to go Chaos Knights, you could give them brazen collars as well. Now the cheap infantry can also just be magic resist 2 across the board. This is a huge upgrade for Marauders. I would say even more than the light armor, being able to take magic items, you can just put a 20-point magic item on the unit champion, suddenly magic resist 2, across the board. Your opponent's going to have a real difficult time hitting you with magic missiles. And this is the sort of unit that actually, if you're playing against Warriors of Chaos and they've got Marauder Horsemen and foot Marauders, and then the rest of their list is Dragon, you're not going to want to put the magic missile into those dragons. So I think it's a really, really strong upgrade here, and something that Chaos players should be very happy about. It's gonna beef up the usability of this unit. Speaking of beefing up the usability of this unit, we've still got the skirmishes and open order 0 to 1 per 1,000 points. That's all good there. But also just built in 0 to 1 unit per 1,000 points can have ambush at a point per model. That's quite nice. I before 1.5 was definitely a vocal ambush hater, but now we've got stuff like baggage trains getting into the back lines. We're seeing a lot more cannons. Having a unit getting into the back lines and being able to do something and causing some issues is probably something I'm vaguely interested in. Also, if you want to play the keep my drops low game so I can play an aggressive army of chaos without having too much stuff on the table to start with, you can absolutely do that. You have to have minimum 3 units plus characters. You could put 2 units of Marauders in reserve and then have a big Warfire Dragon. I'm not saying that's the way to build, but you could get down to a 2-drop chaos list if you wanted to, which is probably more funny than good. But I do like having the option there for ambush, especially in an army that's as aggressive as you're going to be playing with Warriors of Chaos. Magic standard, up to 50 points, 0 to 1 per 1,000 points. That's huge. I think that's really solid. There are obviously some new great banners that we can look at in terms, one of them you can get turns off fly. If we compare to Cathay, one of the things that people take Jade Warriors for is literally just having a unit that you can put a banner in that turns off fly. That's really strong. Something that people should probably be, thinking about putting into their list. My favorite armies, oh no. All of my fast flying stuff is going to be taking a bit more, having to play a little bit better in that. That's absolutely fine. But just magic standards, even if you just take a war banner, that's really solid. There's a lot of stuff there that you could go if you wanted. You could give them stubborn with the stubborn banner. It's 50 points. It's probably a little bit more than I'm wanting to pay. But I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do here that's good. And obviously Chaos have some really nice banners as well, such as, you can stack, if you wanted, you could stack a BSB in here, and you could have a very cheap unit that's just -2 to be shot between the new core magic banner that gives you -1 to be shot and the blasted standard from Warriors of Chaos. Icon of Darkness. Whichever of the 2 banners that's good against shooting that gives you -1 to hit, I think it's Icon of Darkness. Before we even get to the new Chaotic Cults, there's some new rules down at the bottom. So there's still Close Order, there's still Shield Wall, there's still Warband. There's still, Mark of Undivided. All of these things are the same here. They've just gained Horde for no reason. And now, that makes sense, in my opinion. I think that makes a lot of sense. So we're getting from our base Leadership 7 here to Leadership 10 with the Horde Warband interaction. Obviously, this does mean that you're going to have to start thinking about how am I going to deal with first charge or being disrupted when enemy units come in and hit you and remove your rank bonus, because then you lose the Leadership bonus as well. But this is an incredible rule. They're not as good as Men-at-Arms. Are they as good as Men-at-Arms? This is pushing them in the similar sort of design space as like Yeoman Guard or Men-at-Arms, which is a relatively cheap unit that is relatively tanky with a lot of rules on top of them. Now, yes, Yeoman Guard, which are probably the best non-undead infantry in the game, are only 5 points a model, and that comes with a shield built in and a halberd. Whereas you're paying 7 points a model to get the shield. But I think they're still really, really good. And you can layer stuff on top of them. So you can either go quite cheap. You can have 30 for 210 points plus command. So we're then going to be putting stuff on there. You're probably looking at somewhere between 200 to 300 points for this unit if you want it to do stuff. And I think that's a solid amount of points to spend on a solid core scoring unit that's just going to stand up to a lot of defense. And that's before we even get to any of the other upgrades that we can put on them outside of the stage sheet. So I think this is a huge glow up, absolutely massive glow up for Marauders, just across the board. The first time I looked at this, I was like, oh, okay, sure, they get some chaos cults, but they lose the marks of Tzeentch and everything there. No, they got a lot here to be built in with the unit. I think it's a really great upgrade. We'll talk about the actual chaotic cults after I've done the second unit, but I think now is a good time to just mention they're losing the marks of chaos that they could have picked. Mark of Undivided was almost always the right choice, and it continues to almost always be the right choice for most things in the Warriors of Chaos book. If you're talking specifically about, Spawn, they have, that, the Forsaken, sure, and then characters that are super beefy, want Mark of Nurgle. Cool. Outside of that, it's probably just you're looking at doing Mark of Tzeentch, if you want +1 to cast, or maybe you're doing something gimmicky with halberds and initiative shenanigans and making your opponent strikes last and you being initiative 5 when they charge you. There's some gimmicky stuff in there, but usually Mark of Chaos Undivided, which is reroll Fear, Panic, Terror, that was going to be your bread and butter. That's what you should be going with. Specifically with Marauders, and also Marauder Horsemen, I'm just going to lump them together here. There were two things that people did. Didn't really take Mark of Slaanesh or Nurgle. Did sometimes take Mark of Khorne to get Frenzy, so Marauder Horsemen with Frenzy and Flails, quite a cheap unit that hits pretty hard. Completely uncontrollable because they're frenzied. But if you're going full pressure, I didn't mind it because of how little points you were paying. Like, if you go and have a look at the Marauder Horsemen in the before times, just to save myself spoiling anything as I move on to the next one, 12 points a model, you could give them Flails and Mark of Khorne, so you're looking at 15 points before any upgrades. I'd probably still give them the shields as well. But you can take a unit of 5 for 75 points, and they'd run in and they'd hit things relatively hard, strength 5 on the charge with 2 attacks each. I don't mind a unit like that being frenzied, but that is now gone away because we've lost the ability to put Marks of Chaos on the Marauders, which I think is a little bit of a shame. But then we've got these upgrades here, which I think have some utility. But again, they're leadership based, so we'll talk about how that interacts with the army later on. Mark of Khorne, I'm not too worried about losing. Mark of Tzeentch, I think, is a little bit of a shame. So Mark of Tzeentch gives you +1. Well, sorry, it gives you magic resist 1. I think, does it give you flaming attacks as well? The reason you take it is because you're going to be taking a wizard, and if the wizard is inside a unit of unit strength 10 or greater with a Mark of Tzeentch, you get +1 to your casting roll. This was good pre 1.5. Post 1.5, this is an even stronger ability. Now, you don't necessarily see people taking it. I think, realistically, the way that people are going to build is going to be Triple Dragon with Warriors of Chaos. I'm talking specifically before this Arcane Journal. I think there's some really interesting stuff in here that we can play around with, and I'm really interested to play actual Warriors of Chaos. I think this is a lot of fun. But we're living in a world where people weren't necessarily taking the Tzeentch mark as much, but it was very strong because it was increasing your casting bonus by 50%. You were going from +2 to cast to +3 to cast if you were in a unit of, Mark of Tzeentch infantry or cavalry with your wizard. This is now something you can't do. If you want to take, usually it was going to be a mounted Tzeentch sorcerer inside a unit of Marauder Horsemen. You couldn't be skirmish because you're different unit types, but yada yada. So you'd be running around in a brick and just getting that +1 to cast while also being protected from enemy output to some degree because you had a bodyguard unit. You now can't do that unless you go for Chaos Knights. And if we're talking, Chaos Marauder Horsemen, it's 12 points base, 14 for Tzeentch, 15 just to give them shields. So you probably don't have to do much more than that. You'd give them unit champion and musician as well because you want to keep your unit as safe as possible. But you're looking at probably like 120, 140 points for a good number of bodies there. Now, if we go up to the marker, the Chaos Knights, the 27 base, you probably should take Lancers, even though you're not necessarily planning on getting to combat. It's just always take Lancers on your Knights. Mark of Tzeentch as well, 31 points. Suddenly you're paying roughly double or over double per model just for a bodyguard, which I don't love. Yes, you can take less here, but you need the unit strength 10 for it to work. So I think losing that easy access to a mobile bodyguard that gives you +1 to cast is a little bit of a shame. And that's the only real thing that I think the Marauders are losing in this setup. Yes, obviously there's the base size, so you could argue that you're going to get less models into base to base for your opponent, or it's easier for people to hit you and get multi-charges into you. I don't think that's a major thing, but I think losing the marks is a little bit of a shame. Moving on to the Marauder Horsemen, a little bit more changed here. So again, stat line exactly the same. In this case, the base size is the same. Still come as a unit of 5+, but now default they're coming with light armor and shields instead of just coming with light armor and then having to purchase the shield. So that's nice. The cost hasn't gone up. You're keeping things the same. I think this is a nice boost to them. And then we'll go to the upgrades, and they gain some stuff, they lose some stuff. I don't think any of the stuff that they lose is particularly a problem. People might have used, so looking at the upgrades you can go for, cav spears, throwing spears, and flails, that's exactly the same. You're still putting a point for the flails if you want the better output, or you take the cav spears for free because cav spears are actually just pretty good. Throwing axes, that's the only ranged option you can go for now. You previously were able to go for javelins, which are a weapon that you can march and shoot. So if you were using your marauders as like a really fast march them, 16 inches, throw some javelins, and harass skirmish unit, then you are losing out here. But on the flip side, I don't think anyone was really doing that. I haven't seen anyone doing it. I don't think it was particularly effective. By the time you've shot at long range, you're hitting on 5s. I just don't think this is something that people were doing super regularly. And we do keep the ability to take throwing axes. So I think that's fine. If you were using javelins, then it's unfortunate that you've lost the ability there. But I think it's not an option that was massively used. I did see people paying for them. I'm not sure how often people actually shot them, is probably how I should have phrased it initially. But yeah. So melee choice is the same. Throwing axes instead of throwing axes and javelins. So you lose one ranged option, and we've got shields baked in. So far, I'm feeling like this is a net positive. Still got the Chaos Cults. We've lost the Marks of Chaos. We'll talk about that again. Or we'll talk about the actual cults after this unit sheet. Still got the full command. That's the same. Again, now, Marauder Horsemasters. 25 points of magic items. Previously couldn't do this. Now, we can put magic resist on them. Again, if you're trying to go for that magic resist blanketing, that's very good. Or you can just, if you're playing an army that is a little more worried about ethereal, for example, which if you wanted to go full Marauder core, you actually might be a little bit worried about ethereal because, sure, all of your, Chaos Knights or Warriors would have ensorcelled weapons, but you don't have those. So you've got lots of units without any magical attack. So if you wanted, you could give like a cheap magic weapon here. There's probably multiple other things that you can do with it. I haven't really dug into what you can build on the unit champions here because it kind of just feels like the obvious thing to go for is just like, cool, just give me magic resist and maybe a charm shield as well. That's a good place to be. I'm happy with that. On top of that, we've got other options, but also some downgrades. So we've kept all of the same special rules down at the bottom here, with the exception of one. So we've got Fast Cav, Fire and Flee, Mark of Undivided, Open Order, Swift Stride and Warband. That's all the same, but we lose skirmishes. You now have to choose on your unit sheet to replace Open Order with skirmishes, and you can only do it 0 to 1 unit per 1,000. I think that is a downside. I think that's a shame. I'm not sure you want to run 3 units in Marauder Horsemen, and I'm not sure that you're worried about giving up Open Order if what you want to do is use the skirmishes, but it is losing something, so maybe there's some edge cases there where that's going to be a little bit frustrating. Yeah. Again, you can take units with ambushes, though, so that's a nice upgrade. Again, 0 to 1 per 1,000 points, point per model. Seems very reasonable. And the big thing here is the purchase a magic standard worth up to 50 points. Now, again, we're going to talk about the magic items, the new magic items later. I think I'm going to stream this evening or maybe do another video about it over the weekend. Whatever. We'll talk about that later on. But one of the banners gives you extra AP on the charge and reroll 1s to wound. I don't hate that on cavalry spears. Now, it might be a little bit pricey to put on a unit of Marauder Horsemen, but if you wanted to go for like a moderately priced heavy hitter, that's something you could do. It feels more like I want to play a full Marauder core, as opposed to this is something that is, so strong that it is above all of the other options. But it's the thing that jumps out immediately, where you're running around where you've got the cavalry spears that are, they're strength 4, which is great. They're only AP 1, suddenly making those AP 2, rerolling 1s to wound gives you a big boost in efficiency when you're trying to take down those sort of side units that you'd want a light unit of cavalry to go into. So yeah, interesting stuff there. I think some side grades for Marauder Horsemen. More side grades than with the regular Marauders, but I still think overall it's a buff. I like not having to pay a point for the shields that you get built in now. So, Chaotic Cults, a new upgrade that you can put on your Marauder, Marauder Horsemen, regular Marauders, as opposed to giving them Marks of Chaos. This is to represent the clans that are aligned with the Chaos Gods, but are not necessarily aware or directly worshipping those Chaos Gods. How does it work? You can't have more than one Chaotic Cult, same as a Mark, and a unit with a Mark of Chaos can join a unit belonging to any Chaotic Cult as normal. So this doesn't stop you from putting characters into units, which is good. It would be interesting to see if they FAQ the previous. I guess they wouldn't FAQ. They just put it in here. I'm a little surprised that the other Marauder stuff that we've seen in the Warriors of Chaos Arcane Journal, the Huskarls and the stuff there, I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen those have their Marks of Chaos replaced. I'm not sure I'd want them to, but just for consistency, it seems a little surprising to me that we don't see them replaced. And also the Marauder character, whose name I've completely forgotten because I've never seen them on the tabletop. I'm not talking about Friedel. I'm talking about the build your own Marauder character. Maybe there's something there, but yeah, they still have Marks of Chaos as opposed to these Chaotic Cults. Anyway, so the way that they work is it's a once per game buff, which immediately, if you're paying a point per model for a once per game buff, I'm not in love with that. You take a leadership test. If the test is passed until its next start of turn subphase, all models within the unit gain the following benefit. If the test has failed, the unit's implorations go unheeded. And I do like that they've worded it correctly, so the buff specifically doesn't pass on to any characters that have joined the unit. That wouldn't have worked anyway, given the FAQ changes they made, but they made it nice and clear. So, leadership. These units have leadership 6 or leadership 7 for the unit champion. Your general's going to be leadership 8 or 9, but bricks of infantry do have Warband and Horde, so they're going to have leadership 10 baked in, and it doesn't say unmodified, so that's fine. I think you're going to be able to test on a leadership 10, but if it's a once per game buff, I'd rather that they just gave us the buff for the entire game. Either it's a leadership test every turn, which is probably too good, or it's just, a flat once per game you get this. I don't really know why you've got a double dip. Again, for Chaos Marauders, I'm not really bothered, but for Marauder Horsemen, it's a big deal. And also, if you want to take Marauders in skirmish, they're just going to be sat at their normal leadership 7, or if you get shot at a lot before you get a chance to use your buff, and you lose a lot of the models, and you lose the rank bonus, then you're going to lose some ability to get these off as well. So I think the mechanic of how this works is a little bit of a miss there. I don't love the way that it's been implemented. The options that you can go for, we've got Khorne, we've got Slaanesh, we've got Nurgle, and we've got Tzeentch. Now, the one that disappoints me the most is the Cult of the Fell Raptor. You can take a leadership test to once per game, get a 6-up ward save for 1 turn, so until the start of your next turn, against non-magical attacks. Non-magical enemy attacks. So if you accidentally somehow dropped I don't know, I think the Hell Cannon's got magical attacks, but if you somehow hit one of your units with your own artillery, if you're playing allies or something like that, you don't even get a save against it, which I don't know why they needed to clarify it was enemy attacks. Is that standard wording? Am I looking at that more critically because I'm already disappointed in it? But yeah, I don't like this. I don't think this is worth a point model. Just getting a 6-up save for one turn. I would rather this was just baked in and be like, if you are the Cult of the Fell Raptor, you get a 6-up ward. Maybe that's too strong. Maybe that just becomes the default. But, if you look at Marauder Berserks that you got in the Warriors of Chaos Arcane Journal, people, they haven't been necessarily destroying the meta with their unbuilt 6-up ward save against non-magical attacks. So I think it would probably be fine. Maybe you just make that one 2 points per model or something like that. Cult of the Carrion Crow. This one is the one that I think is the most obviously impressive on the face of it. You get +1 to your toughness for a turn. You set up your unit of Marauders. You've got 30 Marauders full command. Maybe you've got Warband in there. Warbanner, sorry. You've got a lot of static combat raz. Infantry outnumber. Rank. close order. Do they come with close order? They come with open order. I think they come with close order. Standard war banner. So you sat at 7 combat res. Your opponent's setting up to charge you. You pop the +1 to your toughness. You're going to take less casualties. I think this is a really nice buff. This is something that I'm willing to pay a point per model for. This seems really obviously good. The other one that, in my mind, seems really obviously good is the cult that gives you poisoned attacks. Now, obviously, poison is worse than it was in, pre 1.5. Previously, it was just, auto wound on 6s. Now it's +2 to wound. I still think that's pretty solid. I don't mind that at all. I can live with it. So this is going to be good on, like, maybe Marauders with flails, where you're looking to go into something a little bit bigger, or maybe not flails, but Marauder horsemen, because I think if you're using this, you want to be able to get the charge, and if you're running foot infantry Marauders, you're probably not reliably getting the charge. Although, again, there are some more buffs that we can layer on this unit that maybe change that, so we'll come around to that later on. So the poisoned attacks, I think, is good more on Marauder horsemen. I don't believe that it says specifically that it only applies to the... It doesn't say that it doesn't apply to the horse, so the horse will get poison attacks as well. That's pretty nice. Speaking of, the Cult of the Bloody Hound, their horses will get +1 weapon skill as well. I don't think +1 weapon skill is something that I'm super excited about here. If it was a flat +1 to hit, that is a point, at a point per model, I'd definitely be considering that. But a lot of the time, going from weapon skill 4 to 5, either you were hitting them on 3s anyway, because they're weapon skill 3, or, they're weapon skill 5 or whatever. Like, there are, if you're going into specifically weapon skill 4 or weapon skill 2, it improves your ability to hit. That's what I'm trying to say. And there are a decent chunk of those units out there, but it's not a guaranteed thing. If you're playing against, an enemy Warrior of Chaos army, you've just wasted this entirely. It's a point per model that's doing absolutely nothing, even if you pass your leadership test, which, you might just fail the leadership test and not get these buffs off. But yeah, I think Cult of the Slithering Serpent and Cult of the Carrion Crow are the two that really jump out at me as fitting what you want your units to do. Marauder Horseman hitting a little bit harder on the charge, I can live with that. Cult of the Carrion Crow, having your stationary scoring unit be a little bit beefier, I can live with that as well. Both of those I quite like. I think I like them more than I like actual Marks of Chaos, because as far as I can tell, you keep your Mark of Undivided. So yeah, I think I'm probably going to be looking at, where if I'm doing Warriors of Chaos, 1 or 2 bricks of infantry, the Marauder infantry, give them Cult of the Carrion Crow, jobs are good. This feels like a solid defensive buff that I'm happy to take. So that's the new Marauders, but it's not all of the rules that apply to the new Marauders, and these rules apply to everything in the army, or most things in the army, the things that you are probably taking for Warriors of Chaos. These are chaotic traits, which is, if you were counting, following along at home, this is the 3rd set of upgrades you can put on your Chaos characters. We've got Marks of Chaos, we've got, not mutations, Chaotic Gifts, I think they're called, and now we've got the Chaotic Traits. So you can really just start poiling stuff on top of each other. My ability to talk is a chaotic trait. You can pile upgrades on top of each other. Now, the Lord on Dragon, which is already capped on points, probably isn't going to get any better or much better here. I haven't dug around if there's anything here that I'd like to put on there specifically. But you can put these not only on characters, you can put them on units, including the Marauders. So all of your Marauder units, Marauder Horsemen, Berserkers, and Huskarls can have at least 1 trait. Huskarls can have 2. So I think that's really interesting. The Warriors and Knights, your core Chaos Warriors and Chaos Knights can take 1 trait each. The Chosen versions can take 2. Great, really solid stuff. And then your characters, Chaos Lords and Sorcerer Lords can have 2 traits. Exalted Champions, all the way down to the Marauder Chieftains, can have 1 trait. I wonder, it feels a little bit odd that you can have an Exalted Champion that has the same amount, is capped at the same amount of traits as like a normal Chaos Warrior. It doesn't matter, and from a balancing perspective, it's probably right. It just feels a little bit like maybe they should have had 3 on the Chaos Lords and 2 on the Exalted Champions. That's probably getting into the weeds too much, and it might have opened up potential for some sort of weird combination. I don't know that there is anything there. But yeah, it just, as a flavor, it feels like maybe we should have seen a little bit more juice to the characters there. But I really shouldn't complain, because you can already build 750 point Chaos Lords, so this is just really juicing them to the sky if you're playing, 4,000 point games, where you're just I'm going to take 1,000 point Chaos Lord on a dragon. Anyway, these things come with a point per model or a point per unit, depending on the upgrade, and they are separate to marks. They don't replace your marks of chaos. They just give you additional upgrades, and I think they're pretty solid. So let's have a look through at the different options we've got here. So let's start off with Unnatural Fortitude. This is not something you can put on your Chaos Warriors or Chaos Knights, because it specifically says, unless they're wearing heavy armor or full plate armor, models with this chaotic trait improve their toughness characteristic by 1 to a maximum of 10. Before you actually me, yes, you could theoretically put it on the unit, and it just wouldn't work because Chaos Warriors come with full heavy armor built in. So you can't get T5 Chaos Warriors, which is both a shame and probably for the best. But you can get T4 Marauders. So if you want to go hand weapon shield Marauders with this for 9 points a model, you can have a T4 model that is, it's got a 4-up save in combat and it's toughness 4. That's relatively beefy, but it is starting to get quite pricey. You can obviously put this on, all of your upgrades. The Berserkers, or the Berserkers or Berserks. The Berserkers come with T4 natively, so plus 2 points a model to get up to T5. I think that is very interesting. So there's definitely some play here. You could argue that if you put this on a character, then the character buys magic armor that isn't full plate or heavy armor, that this might stack with them. I don't think that's how it works. I don't think you replace the armor that they have, so I think natively an Exalted Champion or Chaos Lord just can't have this replaced. You can't get to T7 on a Chaos Lord by replacing their full plate armor with Armor of Meteoric Iron. But someone else can look into that. But I think realistically, this is going to be you can't put this on anything other than Marauder's buff. And if you try, your friends might disagree with you, and your TO might not allow it. So, if you think you found a loophole, check with the people you're playing with, but be aware that it's probably not a loophole. That's my opinion on that one anyway. Anyway, +1 toughness though. I really like that. I don't know if I'm paying for +1 toughness all the time on my Marauders. This obviously does stack with the not dark gift, the the upgrades we've just been looking at. My brain is so fried today. The Nurgle. I'm just going to scroll up because my brain is fried. I could edit this out, but you know what? I'm just going to leave this in because I'll just show that my brain is fried. Cult of the Carrion Crow. So this does stack with Cult of the Carrion Crow to give +1 toughness. So theoretically, you can have a turn of toughness 5 Marauder, just regular Marauders, which is obviously going to be something that a lot of units are going to bounce off if you're going into combat with, Dwarf Warriors. If you're in some sort of infantry versus infantry skirmish with Dwarves, they've got Dwarf Warriors that are going hand weapon shield. They're going to wound you on 6s for turns. That's not bad. Yeah, they're going to be better armor than you, but you're much better toughness than them. So I think that's a really interesting upgrade you can go for. And I think as well, if you wanted to go with a really aggressive unit of great weapon Marauders, this is maybe something to consider as well. Like, you get into combat, or the turn you're going to get into combat, you pop you've got this on your unit, and then you pop the Carrion Crow buff. You get up to toughness 5, and then it doesn't matter so much that you're only wearing light armor and you haven't got any other upgrades there. So an interesting one. I think this is going to pop up a lot. They put it at the spot number 1, and I think it's going to be something that we see a lot of. But that's not what I'm most excited about. What I really like is Battle Hunger. So 10 points for the character or 20 points for the unit. So a flat cost, which is really nice. A little bit of a shame if you want to put it on Chaos, a small unit of Chaos Warriors, I guess, or characters. I'm struggling to find a place where this goes. Maybe you put, if we're before we even talk about this, if we go into what stupid thing can we do with it, what if I went with an infantry character that is, so you take an infantry character with the flying carpet, you get up to move 8. But you've got Swift Stride as well. I'd have to double check. Anyway, Flying Carpet is probably something you can combo with this with. But if we're talking about it more seriously, it's a flat 20 point upgrade for the unit. You put it on a unit of Chaos Warriors. It's infantry only, so you can't increase the range of the Chaos Knights. You get +2 to your charge range and your charge declarable range, and you charge and pursue an additional D3. Now, this is a really nice wording here. Normally this sort of upgrade, where you get like a mini swift stride, they normally just give you plus D3 to the charge roll, so you don't get it on the pursuit as well. Really happy to see that there. This combos really nicely with the Taskmaster's Whip, which is a very cheap item that you can take. It's a weapon. You can obviously put magic items on your unit champions, so you could put this on Marauders, or you could put this on Warriors of Chaos, or you put it on a character joining a unit, and you get additional D3 inches of movement after passing a leadership test again. So once you've got that leadership test passed, you get, maybe you're up to some 7-inch base movement, and then you can increase your charge range here. So you can declare charges up to 15 inches away with a unit of warriors or marauders, something like that. Just something that makes playing infantry more appealing in terms of playing the sort of footsie game where you're trying to get into combat with your opponent. I've liked foot infantry for a while. Foot warriors of chaos for a while, post 1.5. They felt pretty solid to me. But actually getting them where they need to be is a little bit difficult. 15-inch declarable charge with, some level of consistency in there. Very interesting. Also goes nicely with Marauders, because Marauders have Warband in. So getting the reroll on the charge there on top of the increased range here gives you some nice upgrades and ability to make it into combat. Next up, we've got Dark Hearts, 20 points per model or 1 point. 20 points per character or 1 point per model for a unit. Infantry or cavalry only. If you win combat and the majority of the models in the unit, so you don't have to have a unit plus a character in there. A character on its own is giving them -1 leadership. The way it works is each unit that belongs to the losing side is -1 to their leadership characteristic when making a break test. But then, models that are immune to psychology or cause terror are immune to this. So what does this realistically mean? This means you can stack more leadership. If you've got a terror causer, you're already reducing the leadership of the unit that you're in combat with by 1. This is reducing it by an additional 1. The way that that's going to work is when they roll to break, obviously you flee if you roll over your unmodified leadership, because this is lowering the leadership stat. So if you've got a leadership 8 unit that loses combat by 1, normally on a 7 they'd give ground, on an 8 they'd fall back in good order. But with this, it would be on a 7 they fall back in good order, and on an 8 they would flee. So being able to manipulate people's leadership is one of the strongest ways of getting them to actually break and flee. I don't know if it's going to be enough. I think it's interesting. You only need 1 unit in the combat to provide this, and because the entire unit has to have the same upgrade, the wording is to stop it so characters don't turn it off if you've got characters in the unit. But you could just take a cheap unit of Marauder horsemen, run them in combat alongside your dragon or whatever, and then make it more likely that your opponent is going to break and flee on top of the additional unit strength of the unit that you're putting in here. I think this is really interesting, and I think it has some actual application. It's one of those which doesn't have necessarily, like, you can't sit and math hammer it out. You can't go, but when will this actually matter? It's something that I think you can use as a tool in your toolbox, and I think very good players will be able to get stuff out of this. Whereas if you're just running your units forwards and playing more of the sort of the Warhammer of our childhoods, where you set up from across each other and the game plays out in a way that's kind of unrelated to the decisions you make. This will be less useful, and if you're playing Warhammer somewhere in between, you'll get some use out of it. But yeah, I like Dark Arts. I think it's very interesting, and you can spend 5 points on a unit of Marauder horsemen to get 5 models with this, and I think that's an interesting buff. Brazen Will, 10 points for a character, or 15 points for a unit. Infantry or cavalry only, gains magic resist 1. Now, this is interesting, because obviously we've got a 20-point magic item that's extremely common, that allows us to put magic resist 2 on all of our units. I am not saying that I think this is pointing towards the FAQ that in January saying that common magic items are no longer common. I think that would be a very good change. I don't think anything in the game should be... I think common magic items are either so bad that you don't care about taking multiple of them, are niche enough that you're in a weird situation that they're probably too good for the points cost, but they're not good enough that anyone really cares about them. Looking at you, Charmed Shield. If you've got a lot of cheap characters, you're going to give them all Charmed Shield, and that's probably too much value for the points, but it's also just a 5-point single-use ward, so it's not the end of the world. or they're completely useless. You know, stuff like I can't even remember which of the weapons are extremely common. Is it Sword of Might? Like, I'm not excited to take Sword of Might. Paying 20 points for +1 to strength and AP is incredibly whatever. So I think I'm not saying that I think this is tied to the FAQ, but I am hoping they get rid of the extremely common ability for Old World, at least 1.0. I think all of the stuff that we have in the game that's extremely common probably shouldn't be spammed. Ring of Fury, just having Hammer Hand across the board, is the least abusive of all of the versions, but again, you probably shouldn't just be able to put a bound spell in all of your units, even though High Elves definitely do need the help. Ring of Jet, very obviously too good. Brazen Collar, sorry Warriors of Chaos players, I know we're talking about your rules, but there's no reason that an entire army should be able to spend 20 points per unit and get +1, +2 to the magic resist. That is too good. So anyway, I wonder if this is a little nod to, hey, we're going to give you a more reasonably costed magic resist that you can take. Obviously, Warriors of Chaos could just go Mark of Tzeentch, so this is something that kind of replicates that, but you can take this without losing your Mark of Undivided, or you can stack it with a different mark, which is nice, and it doesn't go on dragons, it's infantry and cavalry only, so yeah. Interested to see how that one sort of pans out long term, but Brazen Will, 15 points for the unit. Right now, I'm not taking it. I got a Brazen Collar. Next up, we have got Longstriders. So again, this is one that we can't be putting on Warriors of Chaos or Chaos Knights of any variety. This is point per model for a unit, or 15 points for a character. But again, the only character I can think of that you'd put this on is the Marauder Chieftain. So it's probably just going to be young units. Unless wearing heavy armor or full plate, they gain Vanguard. I don't hate that. Vanguarding cavalry is quite nice. Vanguarding your vanguarding your Warhounds, Chaos Warhounds, is something that's very strong. Obviously, 35 points for a unit of 5 models that can Vanguard, can be in marching column is incredible. Having more Vanguard is probably something that's worth looking at doing. So I wouldn't be surprised to see people taking this. It is a little bit pricey if you're getting up to like a unit of 30 models. I don't know that I'm going to be putting this on my unit that I'm going to be trying to hold the central objective with, but something like Marauder horsemen that's maybe equipped with a flail and trying to get into the back lines to deal with cannons. I think this is very clearly something worth considering. So what I'll be looking at. On this sort of opposite side of that, Prophetic Foresight, 10 points for a character or 10 points for a unit. This is interesting that it's different points for the character and unit, and I say that because the units are going to have different base sizes to the characters, so I feel like it's more valuable in the units, but I'm splitting hairs here, it doesn't really matter. But what this does is it's kind of a no deep strike rule. Enemy units can't be deployed within 18 inch of this unit if they have scout. So that's interesting. I'm very glad that it specifically says scouts. There are some, specifically the corner to corner deployment. There you can be closer to your opponent than 18 inches. So I'm glad that they just didn't say that you can't be within 18 inches of your opponent. Otherwise, that would lead to some weird unintended interactions. So enemies can't scout within 12. They have to scout 18 inches away from you. Enemy units can't ambush within 12 instead of 8. So this is interesting. If you're wanting some sort of cheap unit to sit in the backfield and just hold your baggage train, and you also want them to be able to screen out the most space in your backfield, a cheap unit of Marauders that now have, light armor built in, buy them shields, give them prophetic foresight, put them in skirmish, that's probably quite an effective way to screen out your backlines, and it's something that's probably worth doing. Like, I don't know that I'm going to bother to give them any other upgrades. I'm not necessarily going to give them the, any of the new marks. But yeah, just very cheap, 10 points upgrade for the entire unit. It's pretty solid. Something that I'll be considering for my my backfield holding a unit. Finally, and this is an interesting one as well, enhanced reflexes. 10 points for the characters, or 1 point per model for a unit. While engaged in combat, models with this chaotic trait that choose to fight with hand weapons specifically gain +2 to their initiative. So this is for your hand weapon and shield models. You start off at initiative 4 as a Chaos Warrior. You can get to initiative 6 with this, and then you can stack it with Slanesh to get to initiative 7. That's Swordmaster territory. You can fight before a lot of armies are able to do anything, which is very, very odd. Um, yeah, if you're fighting against an Initiative 3 army, like someone's playing humans, basically, and they charge you, you're going to hit them first. Now, you're only hitting them with hand weapons, but you have got Strength 4 base and ensorcel hand weapons on Chaos Warriors, so this feels like it's really pushing you towards just a big semi-Death Star of Chaos Warriors, hand weapon shield, or even Chaos Chosen. Um, yeah, I think this is an interesting trait. Because you can only do it with hand weapons, it does mean that you can't do the shenanigans with halberds, which people have been doing where they use a character that gives them, enemy units in combat with this character are strikes last, so they're initiative 1, become initiative 4 on the charge, and then you with your halberd and your Marcus Lanesh are initiative 5, so you get to strike first. But still, fighting with 2 ranks when charged before your opponent with strength 4 AP1 hand weapons, that's pretty solid. And only a point per model as well. I think this is something that I'm going to definitely try and build around. The main problem I'm having is there's too much cool stuff in here, which is a nice problem to have, frankly. Not only have we got all of those upgrades, we've also got an entire new lore of magic that isn't tied to an army of infamy. It's just you can have it. You don't have to buy a magic item to get there. It's just if you're a chaos caster, why don't you use the magic of the wastes? And I like it. I think it's a pretty solid lore. The signature spell is a magic missile. I'm not in love with this magic missile, but it does have some level of use, I think, in a world where we're seeing bigger units. Cast on a 7, so nice and consistent. Only a 15-inch range, but it's a 3-inch blast template over the center of the target enemy unit. Scatters D3 inches +1, but anything that is hit suffers a strength 4 hit at AP3. I'm not a big fan of templates in terms of just output into units. I think a lot of the time templates are not great. The fact that it's going to scatter is probably not necessarily going to kill it, but it's going to make it a lot less useful than you might want it to be. But then if it does hit strength 4 at AP3 is pretty solid. A lot of stuff in the game at the moment is going to be running around with hand weapon shield, so you're going to get rid of, light armor and hand weapon shield. You're going to get rid of that 5-up save very easily, but also it flexes into, Bretonnian knights are going to be very upset to see this with their lances. Just knights in general with a 3-up save, going to a 6-up save, I think that's very solid. So yeah, this is swingy, but it's not bad. What I don't like about it is that you can just scatter off the unit and do no damage, or you can roll like no hits on your partials and just kind of do nothing, in a way that random hits on a spell don't really replicate. So it's more swingy than a normal magic missile, and I'm not sure that the upside is as high as the upside for other things, but it's a magic missile in your signature slot that also comes with a lore that has a magic missile inside it. So, baseline, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. Speaking of, let's roll through the spells. Starting off with Blackened Bolts, number 1. Casts on an 8 and it's an 18-inch range, which is sort of like my minimum distance I'm comfortable with a magic missile. When you get to 15, people start being able to charge you a lot of the time, so 18 is quite nice. Target enemy unit suffers 2d6 strength 3 hits at AP1. If they suffer an unsaved wound from this spell, you must make a panic test as if they have taken heavy casualties. So this is kind of a Fireball side grade in a lot of ways. Same number of hits, -1 strength, but AP1. AP, I think, is more valuable now than it was prior to 1.5, so I'm not upset to see that in this lore. 18-inch range is a little bit of a shame. I think it's fine. It's not as good as Fireball. It's not as good as the Summoning. It's not as good as Blue Fire of Zinch, but it's a magic missile in a lore that you can roll into, and then you can still swap into Blue Fire of Zinch, for example. So you can easily have 2 magic missiles, both at 18-inch range, both with some AP on there, both with a lot of hits from the same caster, which I think is something that's worth thinking about and playing around with. Veil of Gloom is very interesting. So, it's an enchantment, cast on a 9. It's a 15-inch range spell, and until your next start of turn subphase, so immediately, great, the target friendly unit gains a 4-up ward save against template weapons, or just templates in general, and a 5-up ward save against wounds suffered in the shooting phase overall. That is interesting. So, at its face, this is here's protection against shooting, and I think it does a very good job at that. It's not as good, in my opinion, as Oaken Shield. Yes, this is more effective than, your opponent doing you know, I think Oaken Shield is better than this because having the flexibility of also being able to use it in combat is better. However, this is any range damage, basically. I don't think there's really anything that gets out of it other than anyone who flies over the top of you and does damage. Anything that flies over the top of you and drops a template is you're gonna get a 4-up ward save. So this is very much like an anti-Sky Lantern spell. You know, I've got a 5-up ward against all of your good shooting, and then also if you fly over me and drop bombs, I've got a 4-up ward against those template hits. That's not bad. You know, vortex spells, if they hit you, those wounds were caused by a template, so you get a 4-up ward against those, even though it's not in the shooting phase. This just feels solid. I don't know if there's anything I'm missing. Are there any ways of getting around this with damage that I'm not seeing? The only thing I can think of is something like Hex Wraiths, which fly over the top of you and do like a hit per model. So maybe something like that, but I'm not really worried about Hex Wraiths flying over the top of me. I'm not building my lists going, how am I going to beat Hex Wraiths when they fly over the top of me? So, yeah, if there's anything that I'm missing, let me know in the comments, because I feel like there must be, you know, some major sort of damage that I'm just not considering. But at the face of it, this seems solid. It's cast in a 9, and it's a 15-inch range, so you can't cast it into combat. But again, it's not working in combat, so you kind of don't care. I like this. I think this is a solid spell. Again, I'd rather have Oaken Shield, but this is flexible, and I think it is a decent spell to have in the lore. Vortex of Darkness is an interesting one. So, cast in a 10, which for a Vortex, I'm usually in favour of seeing a higher casting value. It's harder to cast, but it stops it from being immediately dispelled. 15-inch range, which is a really nice range for a Vortex spell. Remains in play 3-inch small blast template. Scatters D6 at the start of every subturn, so random movement. And it hits friends and foes, but it's 3d6 strength 2 hits with no armor saves allowed. That is pretty punishing. I am coming around to Vortex spells again. When Pillar of Fire went away, we sent Pillar of Fire to a rules writing room in the sky. I kind of wrote off Vortex spells entirely, but I think they are interesting. I'm never like, if I've got a lore familiar and there are better spells, I'm not picking this, obviously. But if I'm rolling, I'm not upset to see Vortex of Darkness. You can put pressure on people, you can move block people. Now that templates do damage if your enemy moves over them, I think that's very interesting. So, yeah, I don't dislike this one. And also the scatter only being d6, I quite like, because you're more likely to have it, you know, if you use it as a move blocker for your opponent, making their charge harder to reach you. I think that it's got value there. So, yeah, Vortex of Darkness. So far, we've had 3 decent spells. Nothing that's really blowing my mind, but pretty solid spells there. Shadow's Assailment. A single enemy unit that the caster is engaged with in combat suffers 3d6 strength 1 hits with no armor or regen save permitted. Ward saves allowed as normal. This is very interesting. It's an assailment cast on an 8 that does a lot of output. It's basically, well, it's not quite Unquiet Spirits, but it's you know, it's a lot of hits, no armor or regen. That's going to do, you know, that's spiky, but in some cases that's going to be really nice if you're going into cavalry, for example. If you're facing off against anyone who's got like a 2-up armor save, yeah, you're averaging, you know, what, 1 to 2 wounds here, but 1 to 2 wounds for an assailment spell is probably about where an assailment spell should land, and because there's so many hits and the top end is so high, you might just roll 5 hits, 5 6s. You might roll no 6s as well, but, you know, the top end there is quite scary, and Chaos Sorcerers are wizards that aren't super scared of being in combat. So I like this. I think this is interesting, and I'm interested to see if there's any real application here. Again, we still don't have Illusion for Warriors of Chaos, which is a shame, because I think they're one of the armies that could do Spectral Doppelganger the best. But with that said, still not upset to see this as an option. Speaking of things I'm a little bit upset to see as an option, Crawling Mists. So, have you played against Undead? You know how their entire army has reserve move and it's really annoying to play against? What if that, but for Warriors of Chaos? So, it's a conveyance spell, which means you cast it in the movement phase, which is weird. I don't love that. I feel like this is a spell that should probably be cast in the... not in the movement phase, in the enchantment phase. But it does mean that you're able to move the wizard and then cast it, because it's got, you know, you cast a single friendly unit within 6 of the caster gains reserve move. The wording on this is interesting. So obviously you might have your wizard on a dragon or something, you might have them in a unit, so your line of sight is 90 degrees. You don't need, I'm pretty sure, you don't need line of sight to cast this on a unit. You can cast this behind you even if you've got a 90-degree vision arc because you're in a unit. I think the wording on that is interesting. Maybe I'm wrong. If I am wrong, please do correct me. But just the way that that's worded out is interesting to me. Anyway, so if you cast on a 6, which is very easy to cast, you give a single friendly unit within 6 of the cast at reserve move. If it's cast on a 9 or more, every friendly unit within 6 gains reserve move until your end of turn. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Just being able to blanket, give your entire army reserve move is nice. Where is that good? If you have open order units like Marauders, being able to do a lot of pivots is nice. If you have a lot of lumbering units, that's quite nice. I'm pretty sure random movers can't reserve move. I'll have to double check that one. Yeah, I'm fairly certain they can't reserve move. But yeah. Anyway, I think this spell is very good. I don't necessarily know that it's going to be super OP for Warriors of Chaos, but just giving entire armies access to reserve move, I think is something that I'm a little concerned about what that could look like on the table. Again, I don't think Warriors of Chaos are necessarily super able to abuse it, but if you can think of anything, again, please do let me know. This is an interesting lore, and I'm liking the first 5 spells we've seen in terms of the strength of the lore. And then we've got Chains of Darkness. I do not like Chains of Darkness. This is, I'm pretty sure, just a straight copy paste of is it like Dark Magic has this spell, something like that? Anyway, it's a hex that casts on an 8. It's an 18-inch range spell, and until your next start of turn subphase, target enemy unit is -1 to movement, but it doesn't stop them marching, and leadership to a minimum of 2. This is fine if you want to do leadership shenanigans. Obviously, we've got access to -1 leadership just on a unit, so theoretically, if you roll into this, you can try and make it easier for your opponent to break. You can't cast it into combat, so it's a little more finicky to set up. You've got to cast it before, on the turn you're about to charge, which is fine, but then if you're doing that, people bring a lot of units that have shield wall or stubborn, so maybe you're just like less likely to crack them on the charge anyway. Yeah, I don't know. Chains of Darkness, not doing it for me. But the other 5 spells are pretty solid, and the signature spell is fine enough that in some situations I would consider using it. But yeah, I think these are some pretty solid rules for Chaos players. They have got a lot. If you are a Warriors of Chaos player, you are eating good. You've got a whole lot of upgrades, and I think it's going to really give a lot of options for the core, which is the most underwhelming thing that Warriors of Chaos have. Obviously, their characters are exceptional. Their special slots are pretty packed with options you can go for, but now we've got infantry that are actually quite interesting, I think. Just the upgrades to the Marauders on their own would be an upgrade that I was really excited about, but I'm sad and I really like my my human guard. So, Marauders getting a boost there I think is really solid. All of the other stuff layered on top of it I think is fantastic. And yeah, really excited to put some Warriors of Chaos lists on the table.